You probably remember that game, 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. Good for parties, anytime a bunch of people together, the more the merrier. And it more or less works like this: someone yells out the name of an actor, and then the group needs to get to Kevin Bacon by association. So, for example, someone yells out Emily Blunt, and then someone else will yell out The Devil Wears Prada, which had Meryl Streep. And then Meryl Streep was in The River Wild with Kevin Bacon. So there you have a win, a quick win. And the fun of this game is to show how these connections are so common that the world of Hollywood and actors are so relatively small. But the real takeaway here is that, by analogy, all humans are connected together. And you can play the same game with historical figures, with relatives, with the surprise we all experience when we happen to run into someone we know in a foreign city completely randomly. And it makes us all feel like we're closer than we think. It's just this kind of feeling that actually led me into thinking about gratitude. And that's what I'd really like to talk about today on the No Hair, All Heart podcast. Welcome aboard. I'm your host, Mookie Spitz, and I'll be flying solo again to talk about gratitude. And in this case, within the context of a Kevin Bacon kind of association. So the context is this. A few years ago, my girlfriend at the time told me that one of her friends had an all-nighter with Eddie Van Halen. Now, I'm an enormous EVH fan. Goes beyond just admiring his playing and listening to the music. I grew up with Van Halen, so like most of my generation, it's almost de rigueur that you're a Van Halen fan. But I play guitar as well. And I've admired not only his musicianship and songwriting abilities, and the list goes on, but his creative genius, which, like any genius, if you define a human as such, seems transcendent, out of this world. You don't know where it came from. As cliched as it sounds, it's quite unique. It's distinctive. You can't have quite unique, of course, because it's either unique or it isn't. But geniuses are quite unique. There's a superlative there. There's an emphasis, even if it's not grammatically correct. These people are quite astonishing. And Edward Van Halen falls into that category. And if you're a musician, even an amateur one such as myself, I play guitar. I ended up buying several of his signature guitars. He's had relationships with guitar companies throughout his career. Kramer Guitars, I believe, was the first one. Then Peavey Guitars, Ernie Ball, Fender, an irascible kind of character, a perfectionist. Also, perhaps not the nicest guy in the universe. He dropped companies, guitar companies, like he dropped singers. But the point I'm making is I admired him and I admire him even after his passing, probably even more so, as is the fate of celebrities, where their overall popularity exponentially is boosted from the moment of their death. They enter the pantheon of eternal greats, and they're no longer mere mortals, so we don't have to be jealous of them because well, they've died. So anyway, always have been a huge Edward Van Halen fan. I am dating a lovely woman who had a best friend going back years and years and years. And this best friend's claim to fame was having a one night stand with Eddie Van Halen. So I always wanted to hear more. Not only fascinated by this 2 degrees from Eddie Van Halen fascination and realization, get a piece of Eddie, as it were. But hear the gossip. Everyone loves celebrity gossip too, because the gods of Olympus are made to be mere mortals. We could be jealous of them. We could admire them like gods, but when they fumble or when they display these very, very human qualities, and then you get details about their humanity, well, we just can't get enough of that. And we get a ton of it now, especially thanks to social media. You can jump on X and you can have an ongoing conversation with somebody. Most social channels now. But that all said, I wanted to know more. So finally, after months of talking about this and coaxing and goading, we got my girlfriend's friend on a speakerphone. And she told all. And I'd love to share the story with you from this vantage point, of course, of celebrity gossip. But even more so, the lesson, if you will, that popped out of this story so unexpectedly. And it truly resonated with me because one of my themes, everyone's got emotional themes. They reverberate, you can say, with our childhood traumas, with our survival strategies. One of my themes, one of my reflections, if you will, of trauma and compensatory survival strategy is the feeling that I'm not appreciated. And I've talked about this on other podcasts, and no doubt it'll be a theme of others because it's so central to who I am. This feeling of being ignored, this feeling of being underappreciated, this feeling of being cast aside. And an ancillary feeling that goes with that, a feeling that's directly connected with that feeling of rejection, if you will, of being ignored, is a lack of gratitude. That feeling that you are not only neglected, but underappreciated or not appreciated at all, that you might go out of your way to help people, to be kind, to be earnest, to listen, and there's no reciprocation. And not so much from a quid pro quo point of view, that I do this for them so that they can in turn do something for me. But I've always felt that a lot of my giving comes from the heart and that I get whiplashed by this early childhood traumatic feeling that I am being ignored, neglected, of which the expression is this lack of gratitude. So this story resonates for these two reasons. It shows how connected we are to each other. And it also shines with the most unexpected expression of gratitude that I can really think of. And this does sound like a spoiler, this little prelude, but I wanted to set it up in such a way that you could be tuned into these things as we roll into it. On the one hand, to know that it's more than just a celebrity fuck story, but even more significantly, resonates in that eternal, archetypal, deeply emotional kind of way that the best little stories do. So here goes. As I was saying, my friend of a friend, my girlfriend's best girlfriend, had that all-nighter with Eddie Van Halen. Not only does that put me officially 2 degrees of separation from my favorite guitar player, but her sultry story fills me with salacious glee. Everyone loves celebrity gossip, especially of this scandalous kind. Despite the otherworldliness we ascribe to the rich and famous, and likely because of it, we enjoy seeing the best at their worst. Celebrities fucking other celebrities is interesting, but A-listers banging the proletariat is particularly intriguing. Is James Ellroy, another favorite, by the way, another genius. Whether or not you like crime fiction, James Ellroy, LA Confidential, Black Dahlia, he's your guy. Anyway, as James Ellroy observed, it makes God's human and hints that we might just have a chance with them. The fateful encounter began on a weeknight circa 1993 when Sally, as we'll call her, and the names changed to protect the guilty here. That's when Sally was hanging out with several girlfriends at a bar, and we won't name the bar either, on the Sunset Strip. Eddie and his brother Alex sauntered in. At first, I couldn't believe it was actually them, reminisced Sally. And then I really couldn't believe it when Eddie made direct eye contact with me, winked, and gestured for me to join them at their table. She sat with the legendary duo for a breathtaking hour or so, making small talk and bullshitting, until EVH leaned in and asked if she had a car. Sally nodded, Eddie smiled, and off they went. We were already making out in the parking lot before I opened the door, beamed Sally. I must have been his type because he didn't have a moment's hesitation, and I was utterly starstruck. I've seen pictures of Sally, pictures at that time that my girlfriend at this other time shared, and the resemblance is quite striking. Rather Valerie Bertinelli-esque. This Sally was petite, short, big, frizzy, black 80s hair. Eddie clearly was ready to rock. Finally, in the car, Ed offered what would become a seemingly endless supply of cocaine. We did lines off my dashboard, made out, did more lines, Sally said. I remember driving down Mulholland Drive. They finally got to her place and immediately got naked. The rhythm from the car repeated, both the sex and the drugs with ever greater intensity, oscillating for hours and hours until dawn. In the morning, smiled Sally, I made him coffee and waffles. That's the most memorable part. I fucked Eddie Van Halen all night long, but I'll never forget him asking me to pass the syrup at breakfast. That's so amazing, isn't it? And again, it harkens back to what we're saying about the gods coming down from Olympus, showing human frailty and vulnerability, and that thrilling us mere mortals to no end. But to me, though, mega Van Halen fan that I am, the most endearing part of Sally's story is the denouement. He was a gentleman throughout, she said. A car picked him up in the morning after breakfast, after that syrup was passed, and he kissed me goodbye. Now, fast forward a few years, and Sally found herself seated a few rows from the stage for the band's, Van Halen's, next world tour. In the middle of his guitar solo, Eddie looked up and into the crowd and recognized and remembered her, evinced by giving her a big smile and a big thumbs up. We make an impact in other people's lives, says Sally. Some large, some small, some good, some bad. I knew I'd always remember that night because I was astonished that Eddie did too. Life is a circus full of surprises. Our memories are selective, but our thankfulness shouldn't be. The list of vital things never taught in school is long, and at the very, very top is the joy that we all feel from showing gratitude. And here I have to quote William James, the psychologist, scientist brother of the novelist Henry James. And what William wrote was, the deepest craving of human nature is the need to be appreciated. And this brings me back full circle to my intro. I've got no hair, but I've got all heart. And the heart in me is always yearning, in some sense, for appreciation. If you knew me, if you're listening and you know me, I don't like extravagance for extravagance sake. And I'm not an attention whore, especially when it comes to art, which is what I hold nearest and dearest to my heart. I've got over 400 blogs on the Medium platform, and I'll post the blog that talks about this fun story too in the notes. I've self-published a book. Now I'm doing a series of podcasts, and I rant on social media in first-person POVs on politics and relationships. I do stand-up bits. I love to create content. I love to share content. Whether or not a video goes viral, and I've had a few of those, 500,000 people saw me rant against mass deportations in this country, for example, or people ignore it entirely. I have videos on YouTube, reels that I take tremendous pride in with 0 views. The algorithms are, of course, all different, but all of that notwithstanding, I create content for the sake of creating content. I have that introverted quality to me. So I don't do what I do for the sake of appreciation, nor do I feel hurt if that measured appreciation tends to be lower than anticipated. And the anticipation, to my point, is not high. I create for creating content's sake. But the appreciation that I crave and that sometimes hurts when I don't get it is more related to my interpersonal relationships in real life, not on the interwebs, not related to my art, but related to friends, family, colleagues. And perhaps there's a pattern in my family because my father, of whom I've talked about and will talk about, his story, the story that he's created about his own life, is that of the victim. I remember him ranting at the top of his lungs how he's done so much for this person, only to have them finally shit on him, and how he's gone out of his way to help so and such. And now just look how they treat him. So I have this built in complex, which is resistant to that attitude. And friends, family, people who know me, I'm arguably the opposite of the victim. I never complain. But I have that residual, whether it's congenital or environmental, feeling of being victimized in the sense of not being appreciated. And I also resist it because that's what I saw and because I felt my father was obsessed by it. And I saw the futility in his action and behavior for ranting about exactly that. Now, the irony is the totality of this podcast revolves around that very feeling. But the difference is I'm sublimating it and I'm experiencing my catharsis through my art, my writing, my bloviating on this podcast, sharing these details. And it's a release and it's a self-referential acknowledgement that I'm burdened by this as well. And we all are, if it's fair to say. And that's why this might resonate for people listening, might resonate for you, that I'm not alone in this. We all give in one way or another. We all see our lives and the world through our own perspective. And there's always an imbalance because we're our own point of view. We're the protagonist of our own story, which is the novel. We are continuously writing about our own lives. And when it comes to this disproportionate sense of giving versus getting, almost everyone feels this way at some point, some more than others. And I have my own hurts in this area, especially regarding my kids, regarding maybe a few colleagues, some friends where I felt the relationship was imbalanced. But what I have found, and this is my point emotionally, intellectually, that the antidote to this horrible feeling of neglect, the vaccine, if you will, to feeling underappreciated or neglected or even abused, is to turn it around and express gratitude because I similarly have not shown the gratitude that I could have, would have, should have offered others. In other words, I am equally guilty of that which I blame others doing unto me. And I think instantly of my parents, who did far more for me than I appreciated at the time. It's easy to take our parents for granted. And despite them being imperfect, we dwell on the negative more than the positive, more often than we care to admit. And I admit that I didn't show either one of them sufficient gratitude. And now that ricochets back in my life, as I just described, with my own children, where often I feel that I have done more than I was perhaps expected. I far exceeded my own anticipation of what fatherhood would entail. And I might not be father of the year, but not making it to the cover of Time magazine, I have, at the very least, done a pretty good job. Even perhaps especially by my own humble estimation. So I've been giving, and perhaps not quite getting, as my parents gave. And I never really had the chance to give back to them. And that's why, full circle, I love this story. This story is terrific. This one night stand with Eddie Van Halen was great. However problematic it might come across. Was Eddie married at the time? I don't know. You could triangulate his chronology. How veridical was this story? Well, it seemed pretty true to me. But none of that really matters because what's being communicated is the beauty of their connection, the degrees of separation, the bow being tied. In that one moment where Eddie was again a god, he was on Olympus, looking across into the audience, looking down from the heights to the mere mortal whom he had been with. And beyond even the glorious banality of being asked for the syrup the next morning at breakfast, the god, the guitar god, in his moment, in his element, Zeus, flinging lightning bolts, gazed at the beauty, the mortal beauty, whom he had shared a few infinitesimal moments with, and acknowledged her and gave her a thumbs up, a thank you, a show of gratitude from a God in his own moment of glory. That is beautiful. And that, more than any story I've ever heard, exemplifies the sheer transcendent joy of showing gratitude. And I take even greater delight in my ability and willingness and enthusiasm to show everyone else the gratitude that they deserve. Thanks for listening to the No Hair, All Heart podcast. More of these little gems to come.